There was a birthday card on the kitchen counter when I came home that evening. My daughter had left it there before she drove back to Mississauga. A simple card, a grocery store one with a blue envelope, and inside she'd written, "Happy 63rd, Dad. We love you so much." I stood in the kitchen for a long time holding that card. Outside, the maple in the backyard had gone fully orange the way it always does in October, and the light through the window was that low Canadian afternoon light that makes everything look a little tired. I thought about what she'd told me on the phone 3 days earlier. "Dad, I'm so sorry. We can't come for your birthday dinner. The baby's had another ear infection, and honestly, things are really tight right now. We've had to cancel everything. Even the Banff trip we've been planning since February. Gone. Just gone. We can't afford it." I told her not to worry. I meant it when I said it. My name is Theodore. Theo, most people call me, and I spent 34 years working as a mechanical engineer for a firm out of Oakville. I retired at 61, not because I had to, but because my wife Meredith had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, and I wanted to be home with her. We'd been married 38 years. We had 2 children together, my son, who lives in Vancouver and has always been quietly independent, and my daughter, who lives 40 minutes away and has never been either of those things. Meredith passed 2 years before this story starts. She left me with a paid-off house in Burlington, a pension I'd been careful with, a modest investment portfolio, and a grief I didn't know what to do with. My daughter was attentive in those first months. She came over Sundays. She brought food. She sat with me while I watched hockey games. I wasn't really watching. I was grateful. I told her I was grateful. I told her that often. I think that was my first mistake. The money started the year after Meredith died. Small things at first. My daughter called in January saying the baby, my first grandchild born that spring, needed a specific type of formula the insurance didn't cover, and they were stretched thin. Could I help? I transferred $800 the same afternoon. In March, her husband's car needed a transmission, nearly $3,000. In June, they were behind on their HELOC payment and didn't want to get hit with the penalty, another $2,200. Each time, she called with that particular tone she'd had since she was a teenager, not demanding, never demanding, just quietly urgent. "Dad, I hate to ask. I know you have your own things. But we don't know who else to turn to." And each time I thought, that's what I'm here for. That's what fathers are for. I had the money. What was the point of having it if not this? By the following autumn I'd given her. I added it up once, then stopped looking at the number, somewhere north of $18,000. And then in September she told me about the Banff trip. She and her husband, and her in-laws, his parents, who I had met perhaps 4 times at family events, who owned a renovated Victorian in Etobicoke and belonged to a golf club in Halton Hills, had been planning a week in Banff, the Fairmont. She mentioned it almost in passing. "We've been saving little by little," she said. "His parents are covering the bulk of it. It'll be good for the baby to see the mountains." I didn't say anything critical. I asked if they were excited. She said yes. I hung up and sat in my kitchen and looked out at the maple tree. 2 weeks later, the car needed new brakes and she needed help with the bill. I transferred the money. I told myself I was being a good father. The birthday card was the first time I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before. Not anger exactly, something quieter and more uncomfortable. I set the card on the counter and I made myself a cup of tea and I sat down at the kitchen table and I thought very carefully about the past 18 months. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened her Instagram. I don't use social media much. I have an account my son helped me set up so I could see photos of the grandchildren. I don't post. I mostly forget it exists. But I opened it that night and I found my daughter's profile and I scrolled back to the Banff trip. There were 23 photos. The Fairmont Banff Springs in the background, glowing against the Rockies. My daughter at a spa. She'd tagged the hotel's spa by name. Her husband holding my granddaughter up to a window with a mountain view. A dinner table with wine glasses and candles, the kind of dinner that costs $300 for 2 people before tip. Her mother-in-law laughing, champagne in hand. A hot spring. A gondola ride. My granddaughter in a tiny Canada Goose puffer jacket that I was quite sure cost more than my first month's rent had. And there, in the corner of one photo, half visible, a shopping bag from a Banff boutique. I sat with my phone for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt. Part of me wanted to close the app and go to bed and never bring this up. That part of me, the part that had been a father for 36 years, the part that loved her completely even when she frustrated me, that part said, let it go. She's your daughter. She's struggling. Maybe the in-laws covered everything and she felt embarrassed to tell you. But another part of me, the engineer part maybe, the part that spent 3 decades checking tolerances and verifying measurements before signing off on anything, that part said, look at the numbers, Theo. Look at what you actually know. What I knew, she had told me, specifically, that Banff was canceled because they couldn't afford it. She had said this to me in September. The photos were time-stamped the 3rd week of October. She had not mentioned the trip was back on. She had not thanked me for the break money, or mentioned how it had helped, or said anything that suggested she understood where that money had come from. What I also knew, her in-laws had a golf club membership, a Victorian in Etobicoke, and had apparently paid the bulk of a week at the Fairmont Banff Springs. And yet, I had never, not once, received a call from them asking if they could contribute to any of the costs my daughter had brought to me. I didn't sleep well that night. I made notes in a small notebook I keep on my desk, not because I was planning anything, just because writing things down has always helped me think. In November, my daughter called again. She was warm. She asked how I was feeling, whether I'd gotten out to see my old colleague from the firm who'd moved to Hamilton, whether I was eating properly. We talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things, and then, toward the end, she said she needed to talk to me about something. Dad, this is hard to say. She paused. We've been looking at everything, and there's something we really need. It would change everything for us. Tell me, I said. We want to buy the Mackenzie property. The Mackenzie property was a piece of land, 4 acres outside of Guelph, that a family friend had been holding on to for years and was finally listing. My daughter and her husband had apparently been interested in it for some time, with plans to build. The asking price was listed, she told me, at $140,000. They had financing for most of it. They needed $40,000 for the down payment. $40,000. I did not say anything for a moment. I was aware of my own breathing. I know it's a lot, she said, but this is our future, Dad. This is where we raise our children. And you've always said you wanted to help us build something real. I asked her when they needed to know by. She said 2 weeks. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I opened the small notebook and I read everything I had written in it since October. Then I opened my laptop and I pulled up every e-transfer confirmation I had from the past 22 months. I organized them into a spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, stated reason. Column D, what I knew now about that period. 22 months. 19 separate transfers, total $21,400. I looked at that number for a while. Then I called my son. My son is quieter than his sister. He was always the one who asked fewer questions and noticed more things. He listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. Dad, he said, I think you already know what you want to do. I want to be fair, I said. You have been fair, he said. You've been extremely fair. That week, I made 2 phone calls I had been putting off for 2 years. The first was to my financial advisor who works out of a firm in downtown Burlington. The second was to the lawyer who would help me settle Meredith's estate and had been gently suggesting for some time that I review my own will. I am not going to say those conversations were easy. There is something about sitting across from a professional and saying out loud, I need to change the arrangements I have made because I no longer trust one of my children. There is something about that which is very hard for a 63-year-old man who was raised in a family where you did not discuss these things. But I sat through both meetings. I took notes. I made decisions. The 2 weeks passed. My daughter called on a Tuesday afternoon. She was cheerful at first, asking about my weekend. mentioning that my granddaughter had said something funny at breakfast. And then, "Dad, have you had a chance to think about the Mackenzie property?" "I have," I said. "Can you and your husband come for dinner on Saturday?" She said yes, of course, they'd love to. I cooked. I made the beef stew Meredith used to make every November, the one with the Guinness and the root vegetables, and I bought a loaf of good bread from the bakery on Brant Street. I set the table properly. I wanted the evening to feel like a normal dinner. They arrived at 6:30. My son-in-law shook my hand. My daughter hugged me and said the house smelled wonderful. My granddaughter ran in and immediately found the toy basket I keep in the corner of the living room. We ate, we talked. My son-in-law told a long story about a frustrating project at work. My daughter told me about the preschool they were looking at. It was a pleasant dinner. I kept my voice even and warm the entire time. After dessert, I had made an apple crumble, another of Meredith's recipes. I asked my son-in-law if he would mind watching the baby for a few minutes. I told my daughter I had something I wanted to show her in the study. She followed me in and sat down across from the desk, the way she used to sit when she was a teenager, and I was helping her with a problem. I turned my monitor so she could see it. The spreadsheet was open, all 19 rows, every date, every amount, every reason. She looked at it. I washed her face. "Dad, what is this?" "That's what I've given you in the past 22 months, I said. I wanted us to be looking at the same information. She started to say something. I could see her reaching for a frame, a way to position this. She said something about how she hadn't realized it had added up like that, about how grateful she was, about how hard things had been. I waited. I'm good at waiting. 34 years of engineering meetings taught me that the person who speaks first when a silence gets uncomfortable is usually the one who's uncertain. Then I opened the browser tab I had ready. Her Instagram, Banff, the Fairmont, the Sparemont, the Zaba, the gondola, the dinner with the wine glasses. 23 photos, starting October 21st. She looked at the screen, and she did not speak. "In September," I said, "you told me Banff was cancelled, that you couldn't afford it. 2 weeks after the break money, you were at the Fairmont Spa." I said this quietly, without accusation in my voice. Just information. Just what I knew. The silence was long. "His parents paid for most of it," she finally said. I didn't want to make you feel like." "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I'd like you to think about it honestly before you answer." She looked at me. "When you called me in October about the brakes, and in June about the HELOC, and in March about the car, were you in a worse financial position than your in-laws? Or were you making choices about who to call?" She didn't answer, which was an answer. I closed the laptop. "I love you," I said. "That part doesn't change, but I've been thinking about the Mackenzie property, and I've been thinking about what I can do for you, and what I should do. And I've had some conversations this week with my advisor and with my lawyer, and I think I need to be honest with you about where I've landed." I handed her an envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, a letter from my lawyer confirming that I had reviewed and updated my estate documents. I had also written, by hand, a short note. It said simply, "The $40,000 is not something I'm able to give. Everything I have will be divided equally between you and your brother when the time comes, as it always was. But I need what I give now to come from a real place. And right now, I'm not sure I have that. I love you. I'm here. But I'm not a bank, and I need you to see me." She read it twice. Her face was very still. "Dad," she said, and her voice had changed. It was smaller. "I didn't think of it that way." "I know," I said. "That's part of what I needed to tell you." We sat in the study for another hour. It was not a comfortable hour. She cried at one point. Not manipulative crying, I didn't think, but the kind of crying that happens when someone realizes they have been seeing a person as a resource rather than as a person. She said she was sorry. I believed her. I also knew that sorry, by itself, is not a plan. I walked them to the door at 9:30. My son-in-law, who clearly knew something had been discussed but not what, shook my hand again and thanked me for dinner. My granddaughter had fallen asleep on the drive over and he carried her out, her little head against his shoulder, and something about that image. The sleeping child, the autumn dark, the lights of the subdivision, all of it made me feel the whole weight of what family is and what it costs. My daughter hugged me at the door. She held on longer than usual. "I'll call you," she said. "I know you will," I said. I stood on the porch after their taillights disappeared. The air had that clean, cold snap that comes to southern Ontario in November, the kind that smells like frozen leaves and distance. I went inside and I washed the dishes and I put the leftovers away and I sat back down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't finish. There is a version of this story where I am the hard man. I know that. I know that my daughter could tell it differently. Could say her father had money and didn't help when they needed him. Could say he put a spreadsheet in front of her at a dinner table and made her feel like a debtor. I know how it could look from outside. But here is what I also know. I spent 34 years making sure the tolerances were right, making sure the numbers were checked, making sure what I signed off on was something I could stand behind. And I spent 38 years with a woman who believed that love was not the same thing as saying yes to everything. Meredith would have caught this 8 months before I did. She was sharper than me in those ways. She would have sat our daughter down gently and said something wise that I am still not wise enough to say. What I know is this. I am 63 years old. I am, in the language of things no one says at dinner, a widower with assets. I have a pension, a portfolio, a house in Burlington, and a finite number of Novembers left in me. I do not say that morbidly. I say it because it is what it is, and because one of the things I have learned, slowly and at some cost, is that being a good father to an adult child is not the same thing as being endlessly available. It is not giving less, it is giving honestly. My son called me the following Sunday. He already knew because my daughter had called him first, which was its own kind of information. He didn't take sides. He said what he always says, which is, "Dad, I think you did the right thing." I told him I wasn't sure right and wrong with a point. The point, I said, is that I want her to know I see her, the real her, not just the version of her that calls when something's broken. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think she knows that now." I hope so. I genuinely hope so. Because the maple in the backyard has gone bare now, the way it always does by late November, and the house is quiet in the way houses get quiet when you've lived in them alone for a while, and I am still her father. I will be her father until I am nothing at all, but I will not be her bank, and I think Meredith would have said those two things were not in conflict. The Mackenzie property sold to someone else 3 weeks later. My daughter called to tell me. Her voice was careful, feeling for something, maybe checking whether I felt guilty. I told her I was sorry it hadn't worked out. She said, "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what you said." "Good," I said. "I've been thinking about it too." We talked for 40 minutes. About nothing important. About my granddaughter's new words. About a documentary I'd been watching. About whether we should do Christmas at my place this year, the way we used to when her mother was alive. Before she hung up, she said, "I love you, Dad." "I love you too," I said. "I always will." And that is the part I want to hold on to. Not the spreadsheet, not the Instagram photos, not the $40,000 that never moved. Just the 40 minutes on the phone on a Sunday afternoon in late November. The ordinary forgiveness in it. The way love, real love, not the transactional kind, has a way of finding its way back through even the most uncomfortable truths. I hung up and looked out the window. The maple stood bare against a white-gray Ontario sky, patient as it always is, waiting for the spring it already knows is coming. I keep thinking about that maple in the backyard, how it doesn't apologize for going bare. It just does what November asks of it, and waits. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a retired engineer from Oakville who spent 34 years making sure the numbers added up before anything got built. And what I've come to understand, sitting in this quiet house in Burlington, is that the same principle applies to the life you build with the people you love. If the foundation isn't honest, nothing you put on top of it will hold. Not for long. What happened with my daughter wasn't, in the end, about money. $21,000 is not a small amount, but it isn't what kept me up at night. What kept me up was the realization that I had allowed a fiction to exist between us, that I was a resource she managed rather than a father she knew, and I had allowed it because I confused generosity with love. They're not the same thing. Meredith knew that. She tried to show me in the quiet way she had, and I was too eager to be needed to listen properly. There's a kind of courage required to look at a situation you've helped create and say, this is not working. Not blame, courage. It took me longer than it should have to find it. But I think that's honest, and I'd rather be honest than impressive. When I opened that spreadsheet, when I sat with 19 rows and 2 years of transfers and finally let myself see the pattern clearly, that was the moment something shifted. Not anger. Clarity. The willingness to know what I actually knew rather than what I prefer to believe, that I think is what finally allowed me to be useful to my daughter in a way that all the money hadn't been. Because what she needed from me wasn't $40,000 for a piece of land outside Guelph. What she needed was for someone who loved her to hold a line. Doing that, sitting across from your own child, handing her the truth instead of a check, keeping your voice level while your heart is doing something complicated that takes something out of you. It took something out of me, but I think it also gave something back. Not just to me, to her too. The 40 minutes we spent on the phone the following Sunday, talking about nothing, talking about my granddaughter's new words and whether to do Christmas at my place. That felt more real than any of the calls that came before it. I think what I want to say, if this story means anything beyond my own kitchen and my own regrets, is this. The people in your life will often rise or fall to the level of what you ask of them. I asked very little of my daughter for 2 years. I asked her only to accept what I offered. When I finally asked for honesty, when I made honesty the condition of continuing, she found it. She's not perfect. Neither am I. But we're talking now in a way that's real, and that counts for more than I can easily say. Meredith would have done all of this better and faster, but she's not here, and I am, and I'm doing my best with what I have left. That, I think, is all any of us can do.